As every association is in some way or another related to the dominant complex, every form of association has its own legitimation. Wherever such politics of association within the theoretical political context of psychoanalysis might lead, in the history of Marxism, these methodological, or more precisely strategic decisions are openly political. What appears as the relation between association and the analyst in psychoanalysis is strongly reminiscent of the relation between the spontaneity of the working class movement and the role of the party in socialist politics. In the manifesto, Marx and Engels are very explicit about the strive to minimize tension. I quote, "The communists do not form a separate party opposed to the two other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole." It is, of course, not so much in Marx's own thought, but in the history of the socialist project that this tension will become central. In the history of Marxism, precisely this question will be of vital importance. Rosa Luxemburg's accentuation of the spontaneity of the masses and their capacity to self-organize opposes prominently Lenin's conception of the avant-garde party. The heritage of political associationism remains vital in left-wing communist strands of council communism, where free association, free from party domination, is the central idea. I wonder whether I can read on. So I have mentioned before that the ontological construction which Marx and Freud share is not grounded on any kind of crudely material or thing-like foundation. Rather, it refers to a structurally complex relational system that is, in a mediated way, materially concrete. Association is, in this respect, an expression of the structural connectivity too. As such, it, on the one hand, has a therapeutic and practical dimension and an epistemic dimension on the other. The measure of the validity of associations and the measure of their success is their relation to the whole. The more developed the chain of association, Freud accentuates, the more correct it is too. The associative threads, he writes in his Studies on Hysteria, I quote, interweave with one another and finally lead to a tissue of thoughts which are not only perfectly rational, but can also be easily fitted into the known context of our mental processes. End quote. The degree of rationality seems to consist in the connectivity of associations and the degree to which it expands. As this is a therapeutic means, it is meant to replace the old order. Freud's method, of course, is mainly cathartic. Hence, the epistemic and the therapeutic aspect of association overlap to a large degree. And obviously, this is different in the social philosophy of Marx, where association is an organizational and strictly practical means. While in the case of Freud, the therapeutic function of association seems to be completely absorbed in the epistemic, it is the therapeutic practice of association that preponderates in the considerations of Marx. But both will find the normative measure in the construction of an alternative connectivity, a network of associations that approximates the totality of the complex of societal order, which is to be replaced. Marx writes, I quote, "The working class, in the course of its development, will substitute for the old civil society an association." And it will do so by spreading the idea and political form of association as broadly as possible. Association will, as Marx claimed, have to, and quote again, make the revolution permanent until all the more or less property classes have been driven from their ruling positions, until the proletariat has conquered state power, which is a bit contradictory, I admit, and until the association of the proletarians has progressed sufficiently far, not only in one country, but in all the leading countries of the world. And although the political, organizational aspect of association preponderates, association has an epistemic dimension for Marx too. Association, as a political means, results from the connectivity of human labor that already exists. But as this form of organization merely exists secretly under the repressive rule of capital, association makes this social secret explicit. The reorganization of the division of labor through association is thus both a practical and an epistemic means to break with the repressive order of institutionalized ideology. And I'm coming to my last part now. What conclusions to draw? The theories of Marx and Freud are obviously not about the same thing. My reconstruction did not try to suggest that. My interest was rather a structural one. I tried to show that the structural analogies between Marxism and psychoanalysis are not to be reduced to ontology, but also consist in a specifically and aesthetically inspired method. This leaves a bunch of meta-theoretical questions open. How can these two different theoretical practices be related to each other at all? What consequences could be drawn from this analogy? I see four possible consequences to be drawn from this constellation. Firstly, one could think of ways of mutual denunciation from the standpoint of either orthodox psychoanalysis or orthodox Marxism, with totalizing claims about the predominance of either the psychological or the social. From the Marxist version of such a standpoint, Freud would appear as a bourgeois thinker who takes up the historical experience of fin de siècle capitalism and transforms them ideologically by projecting them on the constitution of the individual alone. In fact, in The Destruction of Reason, Joachim Kutsch seems to see Freud in such light. And as Freud is, of course, fighting against precisely this morbid historical background without explicitly bringing this forward, there might even be a certain plausibility of that. From the psychoanalytical versions of such a position of denunciation, Marx would now appear as a neurotic who projects mental energies on society. The denial of the inner psychological dynamics would have led to their displacement to other fields of research. Peter Gay's interpretation of psychoanalysis' importance for historiography, and of course the major examples that he has in mind, might be an example for this kind of reading. This argument, too, has a certain plausibility. Experiences of repression and of emancipation might indeed primarily be experienced on an individual level. Both readings are, obviously, of the same structure, and in both cases the similarity would really be the effect of the denial of the own position's totalizing claim to truth. It would be the effect of the own position's totalizing claim to truth. In this sense, both of these interpretations would claim that either of the two theories would basically be wrong, a misinterpretation of its own achievements. And if in this first interpretation of the connection between Marx and Freud, passionate identification predominates, cool historical distance would be central for the second. Such a second position would read Freud and Marx as two examples of the same theoretical paradigm or episteme. From the distance position of the historian of systems of thought, one could describe their analogies as typical for the historical framework that they represent, trying to prove this in comparison with systems of thought from other disciplines too. Such an archaeological position would lean back and leave the question open whether or not there is any contemporary relevance of these theories for today. They would simply be examples for a different historical paradigm, or to say with Hegel, a shape of life that has grown old. Thirdly, this affinity between the theories could be seen as a mere coincidence. Any overarching connection between different fields of theory and its implicit totalizing claim would be rejected. I guess this would be the dominant strand in modernist and hypermodernist theories of rationality. In this light, rationalities appear as area-specific, and any overlaps that go further than logical consistency are coincidental, if not painful. The departmentalization of scientific reason would widely have abandoned any such interference of theoretical construction, since the respective problems that have to be solved are far too different. One would be led to assume that the constitution of the individual and the constitution of the body politic would not allow for any structural comparison. Hence, the theoretical affinities between Marx and Freud would appear as remnants of romanticism, if at all relevant, that would have to be left behind. And this position is doubtlessly a strong position. as it emphasizes the different requirements of different social tasks in diversified social and discursive systems.